Hello, everybody. I'm here to work on chapter 7 with you. So let's get this started. Oops, that's not even the right slide. And oops. Just give me 1 second here to get organized. Okay, let's work on chapter 7. So we're going to be discussing memory today. And in the context of memory, there's a lot to discuss that is relevant to you as students. So I would consider this to be the first part of 3 parts. We have a couple of chapters coming up. This is the first of them. The next one is about intelligence, and the one after that is about motivation. And I would like to kind of take these 3 topics together. So I would consider it to be the first part of 3. Okay, let's get going. So these are our learning objectives. So what is memory? The mental process by which information is both encoded and stored in the brain and then later pulled out. So memory is all 3 of these things, and we're gonna take those one at a time. So the information processing model is basically, the overview of how memory works. And encoding is about the incoming sensory information and how it's organized from, how you perceive the world. And then we store it in a few different ways. Most of the lecture is going to be about how we store memory. And then of course you have to pull it out again, right? Memory, having something in your memory is one thing, but being able to get it out, think about it, actively think about it, and then put it back is something else. Okay, so how do we form memories? So sensory memory is sort of part encoding and part storage. So there's a few different parts to this. It's the shortest term element of memory, where information from the senses is stored, and it allows for the retention of the information around you with enough time, gives you enough time to process it without getting overwhelmed, without trying to take the information and turn it into something that you're going to keep. And so the idea is that it helps filter out all this other stuff that you don't need to remember. Like the color of the clothes people are wearing next to you in lecture, not relevant. Your chances of remembering that are very slim, unless, of course, there was something about it that stood out to you. So most information is discarded. It's a good way to think about this is as the brain's buffer. When we have a video loading over a slow connection, it buffers, it pauses and loads for a little bit before you can use it. So this is the stage that happens before you can use it. Okay. So short-term memory kind of has 2 parts to it. It is not 50-50 in this way. That's just, how the image came out. But it's dynamic. It changes. Part of your short-term memory is working memory, and part of it isn't, and it changes depending on what's going on. Like, are you trying to do something, or are you not trying to do anything actively? Are you just kind of being passive in a moment? So we'll talk about that a little bit. So the portion of short-term memory that is used to very temporarily and store information that you need to work with is working memory. So if you are trying to dial a phone number that you've just heard, right? Like you're using your working memory to do that. It has very limited capacity. There is a reason why phone numbers are the length that they are, right? So if you exclude the area code, phone numbers are 7 digits. That is not a mistake. That is a function of working memory because, if that's what our brains can handle, that's where we end up with. So, the area code thing came later, right? But no choice about that. But that's where the an original number of phone numbers came from, right? And you can keep things in your working memory. We'll talk about how in just a little bit, but in general, it lasts about 15 to 30 seconds. It can be less or more if it's more complex. If you have, other things that are pulling on your cognitive load, that sort of thing. But in general, 15 to 30 seconds. The other part of your short-term memory includes things that you're not actively working with, right? So I think that a good example of this is watching the news, right? So if you're watching the news, you are not trying to manipulate the information, you're just pulling it in. And it most of it is let go, right? Most of that information you don't retain and you just let it go, but it sits in your short-term memory, that the part of short-term memory that is not working memory because you are not trying to manipulate it or use it in any way. Okay, so a little more about working memory. So like I said, the storage capacity is very limited, about 6 to 7. If you try to remember more than that, you are likely to fail. Um, Chunking is very, very helpful for short-term working memory because it's much easier to remember a number when it's chunked. That is why phone numbers are dashed, right? Maintenance rehearsal. So, you can keep it in working memory by repeating it, right? And then elaborative rehearsal is like a little bit different. You're linking the new information to existing knowledge in a way that is designed to make it easier to remember, right? So let's say you're learning about the hippocampus, right? And you're trying to remember what it's good for, right? Well, the hippocampus is where we store memories, learning, right? And so if you think hippocampus, that's what I use when I'm on campus, and the campus is where I learn, and it's about learning, right? Like so you're creating links for yourself that makes it much easier to pull stuff up. Okay. So long-term memory lasts hours to a lifetime. It falls into two categories. So explicit declarative memory is conscious recall, okay? And that includes episodes, right? So these are experiences, and semantic memory. So this is sort of general information and facts. Episodic memory is the stuff that and let me just back up a little bit. So everything starts as episodic memory, right? Whether you're aware of that or not, right? You learn everything somewhere. Whether you remember where you learn it from or not doesn't really matter, but you learn everything somewhere. And then there comes a point for the semantic stuff where it just becomes, part of the furniture. And it just becomes part of your general knowledge. The other word for this is the zeitgeist, right? So, just having general information that is just there that you just know. That's semantic memory. So implicit memory is a little bit different. This is unconscious recall. You are still using these memories, but it's really about skills, right? So knowing how to ride a bike, knowing how to drive a car. For the most part, everybody says, you never forget how to ride a bike. You don't, right? Because it is stored in your implicit memory. Implicit memory is very, very strong. So your procedural stuff is super, super strong. You can not do an action for a very long time and have it come right back to you quite easily. I mean, I haven't ridden a bike in like 35 years, but I feel pretty sure that if I got on one today, I would have no trouble doing it. And if you do forget a step or something in a skill or a task or whatever it is, it's very easy to relearn. Okay, so how is memory organized? So the semantic network model, basically, we've all had this experience. For those of us who are living with ADHD, we maybe have it a little more than other people, right? So the visual here is that every node is a concept, and the concepts all link together. And the way that the reason that they do this is because it's easier to recall things when there's links in between, because you can use one thing to pull something else out, right? And so it's sometimes it activates some weird stuff, right? Or you can go from one spot to the next very quickly, and end up in a pretty random place. But like, whenever, if you've had a conversation with somebody and they're like, hey, while we're talking about Christmas, I just want to talk about, the present that I got for my birthday, right? Like, I can see how that link got made, right? But to get there is not always something that somebody else can follow. So be kind to your friends that are saying stuff that like this to you, and you're like, I don't know where you got there from where you started, but but that is how memory is structured. So schemas is another way to structure your memories. Schemas are mental shortcuts. We are living in a world where there are a lot of things to know. And if you don't have any shortcuts to quickly organize stuff into categories, it's really, really difficult to exist in the world. So, if you have to relearn every time you go to a restaurant that, you stop at the, please wait to be seated, and then, you say thank you to the person who does it, and how you order, and what the order of operations is. If you have to relearn that every single time, that takes up a huge amount of mental load. So schemas allow us to do these sort of shortcuts. They do differ across cultures. Like if you've ever been to a restaurant in Europe, it's different, right, than it is here. And so people are going to know things that you don't know. So there is that cultural aspect to it. The other cultural aspect to it is bias, right? So schemas um play a really large role in bias. And we will talk about unconscious bias a little bit later in the semester, but unconscious bias is essentially biases that you have, that you're walking around with, that you're not really aware of, and this is where they come from, right? When we're developing schemas of the world, sort of by definition, they include bias about groups of people, right? So it's not necessarily bad that you're walking around with bias. It's more about awareness. But we all have it because it comes from this sort of mental process. Okay, processing. Okay, So there's levels of processing. The shallow processing is the focus on really superficial stuff, right? You know, if you are in class and you're zoning out, you can hear what is being said, but you're not really taking it in, right? You're not going to remember it if you're kind of spaced out, if you're not focused on it. Deep processing involves, making the connections between the things that you're hearing and other information that you have in your head. It's really the way that you are beginning to integrate the information that you're gathering into how your mind works. And without deep processing, you're not going to remember much. So there's a couple of different ways to process. So serial processing is sequential. Things happen in order. You have to do math problems in an order. You have to read in order. We read from left to right. Not everybody does, but you have to read the letters in order, and the words in order. If you don't do that, you're not going to understand what you're reading. Phone numbers, if you don't do it in order, gonna get the wrong person. Parallel processing is doing multiple processes at once. So driving is my favorite example of this. You are doing so many things when you're driving. Um, but it's really any multitask situation. So retrieval. Um, Recall and recognition, retrieval can be easy or it can be hard. And when you have to only recognize something versus come up with it whole cloth without any or minimal cues, that's a very different task. So when instructors say, I don't give multiple choice exams because it doesn't test anything. It doesn't mean anything. What they're talking about is that recognition is far easier than retrieval. And what they want to test you on, if they're refusing to do multiple choice exams, is your ability to retrieve, right? Like about how deep is that processing of that information, right? Because you can kind of um, have a shallower processing process, I guess, and be able to recognize that information, but you're not going to be able to recall it unless you use a deeper process. The tip of the tongue phenomenon, I don't think I need to explain what that is. I think it is self-explanatory, but it happens because you can only recall little parts of it. So, there's some sort of dysfunction in how you are retrieving the memory, or there's the association. So you remember the map that we just looked at with the little bubbles that connected to each other. If something is out there sort of on its own and doesn't have a lot of associations, then you're going to have trouble retrieving it. Or if there's interfering associations, and we'll talk about that coming up actually. If there's not a lot of retrieval cues, so like if there's nothing to help you trigger the information, you're going to have a hard time finding it. Retrieval can become more difficult as we get older. And then speech production issues. This is something I really struggle with. So if you are struggling to access the part of a word about how it sounds or is spelled, that can cause this. So just to focus a little bit on retrieval cues, from the last slide, it's the hint, right, that helps you store something in your memory. I just want to like put a star by this because retrieval cues are really, really helpful for studying. Okay, so if you can put a cue on top of a piece of information that you want to remember, then it will absolutely help you find it later. Okay, mnemonics are a good example of that. So if you think of words that are associated. So encoding specificity and state-dependent memory are related concepts, but they're not the same. So encoding specificity principle basically says that when the conditions during retrieval, both internal to your body and external, so the room that you're in, the temperature, whatever it is, matches the condition that you originally learned the information, then you're going to have an easier time recalling that information later. State-dependent memory is part of this, but it's only about your internal state. So, if you are one of those people who gets really nervous at an exam, but not in class, then your state is different when it's time for the exam. And so you're going to have a harder time recalling the information. Okay, so memories, a little bit sketchy for sure. Um, Flashbulb memories are the ones that we form around big events. So often these are traumas. They don't necessarily have to be traumas, but they often are. Here are some really common flashbulb memories. Um, and you depending on how old you are, you might remember a few of these or not. But like we have as society some events that have occurred to all of us where if you're old enough to form memories, you're gonna form a flashbulb memory of it. I was quite young during Loma Prieta, and also I lived in Chicago when I was a child. So Loma Prieta did not create a flashbulb memory for me because if I had lived in California, I absolutely would have. This was 1989. I absolutely would have. I was definitely old enough to create a flashbulb memory, but while it was on the news, and my parents watched the news every night, so it must have, I must have been aware of it. It didn't create any special memory for me because it just was not that significant. But I do remember Challenger. So Challenger exploding was 1986. I was 5. And I do remember that. I don't remember much of it, but I do remember that. And 9/11, I was 20 on 9/11, and I definitely remember that. I remember the moment that I learned about it. But here's the problem. So flashbulb memories are just as susceptible to modification as any other memory, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later on in the lecture about modifying memories that already exist. And people think that flashbulb memories are not susceptible to this, but they are. They absolutely are. All right, so mm, pretty interesting concept of infantile amnesia. So we cannot recreate the encoding conditions of being a baby or a toddler, right? So you remember from the previous slides that, if here, I'll go back. So the encoding specificity principle, that where the overall conditions during retrieval, we want those to be the same, but we can't do that because we cannot recreate, okay, the conditions of being a baby or a toddler. um our even if our external environment is the same, so like the house hasn't changed or whatever it is, we absolutely cannot recreate our internal state, for multiple reasons, but not the least of which is that the hippocampus is not fully developed until we're 2. So even if all of the other elements are in place, without that, they're not really stored correctly. Memories are not really stored in a way that we can get them with an undeveloped hippocampus or underdeveloped hippocampus, depending on how much closer you get to two. So, you know, it also is um, a little bit culturally dependent. So in our culture, people's first memories are usually around 4 or 5, but there are other cultures where uh, it's much later. It's more like 6, at which, when you're a kid is a big difference between 4 or 5. And the reasons why that is purely about recall. So in our culture, we talk a lot about the past. We talk a lot about things that have happened. And so that helps us form memories that last, because every time we pull up a memory, we use that neural pathway, and we'll talk about the neural pathway in a bit, but every time we use that neural pathway, it gets strengthened. And so we can keep memories from an earlier part of our lives than people from other cultures that do not emphasize the past. So that's the difference in the cultural context. So implanting memories. So it is not difficult to create false memories by asking questions that suggest information. This, by the way, is why if you are a mandated reporter, you should not ask questions of somebody that you suspect has been abused or neglected, because it is very easy to mess with the memory and you don't even know that you're doing it. So like, your job as a mandated reporter is to report, not to investigate, whatever suspicion that you might have. So, you do not want to mess with the memory by asking questions, because you completely inadvertently might be changing the memory itself. Okay, so it's not always an attempt to mislead when we ask questions that suggest information, but sometimes it is, right? So if you know anything about gaslighting, it's basically, the attempt to make the other person doubt their own reality. Okay. And gaslighting is a really good example of the malleable nature of memory. So a really good or rather really good really efficient episode of gaslighting will convince you that, you picked a fight or something, purely by saying it enough times, right? Like, you picked that fight, you started that fight. Well, that might not align with the facts, but if it is said enough, it can be implanted. Okay, forgetting. So the memory curve, um, you know, looking at this curve, um, the primacy effect is that the first thing or the first couple of things in a series are remembered better. The recency effect is that the last thing in a series or the last couple of things in a series are remembered best. There's evidence for both. And the bottom line is you don't want to be in the middle of the pack. That's the bottom line, right? Because that's where the recall is the lowest. So you if you are, for example, scheduling a job interview, you are wise to ask when the first interview slot is and when the last interview slot is, even if it's filled, doesn't matter. Ask when the slot is. And you want to put yourself as far to one of those edges as you can. okay, because you will be better remembered by the people who are doing the interview. Okay, so the forgetting curve. This is really, really important for students, okay? 60% of forgetting occurs during the first 9 hours after you learn, okay? So that's 60%. Oh my God, way more than half, right? You have to study to prevent decay, right? Which is just another word for forgetting. But once information is encoded into long-term memory, decay isn't really an issue anymore. Like memories in long-term memory are pretty much just there. And they can fade, or they can be a little bit difficult to retrieve, or whatever it is, but it is very, very easy to relearn information that is encoded in long-term memory, even if it's a little bit rusty. So like the important thing here is this first part about most forgetting occurs during the first 9 hours. Okay, and then it kind of levels off from there. So it's a good idea to go home after lecture, or if you're watching lecture on the computer, to review what you learned within that window. It will help you keep it. So um, there's various kinds of interference. So retroactive interference is the type where the things that happen later interfere with remembering the things that happened earlier. So if you have a 8 a.m. class, and then you have an 8 p.m. class. First of all, very long day for you. I'm so sorry. But the 8 a.m. class is not going to be as well remembered as the 8 p.m. class, because you have an entire day that unfolds after that class that can interfere with the memories that you created during that course. But the 8 p.m. class, that's pretty close to bedtime, right? Even if you stay up late, it's pretty close to bedtime. And so there are fewer memories that are interfering with that consolidation. So that's one argument for classes that are later in the day. But I will say that there are other factors at play here, not just, what's the behavior of our memory, but like, we also have circadian rhythms that we have to pay attention to, right? Like there's kind of an afternoon slump for energy for human beings. That is perfectly normal. And so, you have to balance the information that you know about how memory works with the information that you know about how you work, right? So, it's not the only factor, and it's not even necessarily the most important factor. So anyway, there's another type of interference. It's proactive interference. So it's about things that we knew already, and these are interfering with learning new things. So I think the password is a really, really good example of this. If you changed your password and then you keep smashing in the old password, that is a really good example of proactive interference. So proactive interference is probably a much bigger factor in forgetting than retroactive interference, but because we can also use this sort of prior knowledge to help us connect new concepts to old ones, we can integrate and remember new information better, right? So it kind of balances itself out a little bit. Okay, so more about forgetting, because this is important, right? Especially as students. As the degree of similarity increases, the likelihood of interference also increases. Okay, so if you are unfortunate enough to have your home phone number be 773-883-8819, and then somebody gives you a phone number at the dorm and it's 2 digits different, okay, 882-8818, you're in for a world of trouble, because it will interfere both ways. Okay, the old information will interfere with the new information. The new information will interfere with the old information when you're trying to call one or the other. So it'll interfere both proactively and retroactively. It's a mess. So absent-mindedness. This is basically a lapse of attention that results in a failure to recall information. It's very closely related to shallow processing, right? So, you know, it when you only shallowly process information, there is reduced activity in the hippocampus, and it just kind of we just don't retain information long enough to use it. I mean, this is like walking into a room and forgetting why you walked into the room. That's this, right? Like whatever you were walking into the room to go get, you did not encode it very deeply, and it just like went away. You know, the duh news you can use of the day is that you have to pay attention to remember. If you're not paying attention, you're not gonna remember. I think that is probably pretty clear. But you know, for some folks who engage in classwork by just sort of showing up with a pencil and not really engaging by taking notes or asking questions or even really just like watching the slide deck and listening to the professor, you're not going to learn any of that. There's no point. You might as well just stay at home, right? So you have to pay attention in order to remember. Okay. So, um, suppression, repression, and false memories. Ooh, very sensitive topics here. So suppression, there's no drama around this term. It is intentional forgetting. It is basically there's something that I don't want to think about, and I'm just not going to think about it. Now, how effective that is, I don't really know, because, you know, if I say to you, don't think about pink elephants, what's the thing you're going to think about first, right? So there's that. But it is definitely a thing. But there's something called repression, which is the pushing of memories out of your conscious awareness. And in theory, you know, like we've covered psychodynamic theory, for example, and it's a very strong aspect of psychodynamic theory. Repression is a really integral part of the person's thoughts, feelings, and behavior on an unconscious level, right? So repressed memories are creating thoughts and feelings and behaviors that are, you know, playing out in the real world. Um, you know, the problem is what we've already discussed about false memories, right? So false memories absolutely can be implanted quite easily, right? You can do this by suggesting information during questioning, or you can just like give a false scenario over and over and over again, or even just once if it's powerful enough. And they people will become convinced that this is real, that this is something that has actually happened. And they feel just as real or more real than actual genuine memories, because if somebody's banging away about like this thing happened, then probably you're pulling it up more than a genuine memory would be pulled up. So, you know, we have this problem with repression because there's no almost by definition, there's no way to prove repressed memories, and the way that they come out has a tendency to be in a problematic way. So like, you know, they have a tendency to come out in therapy, for example. And like it can be a problem because when you're a therapist, not an investigator, when you're a therapist, you know, asking questions that have suggestions embedded in them is not necessarily bad, right? But when you're investigating, say, traumas, when you do that, you can create false memories. It's a problem. Okay. Okay. So, we'll talk about this a little bit in a few slides, but every time we recall a memory, it has the potential to be modified. And when we pull it up, we will re-encode it in the new form. Okay. And so it's it's very it's very easy to adjust a memory or change a memory just by pulling it out, right? And it's also possible, to create memories wholesale, right? Like we just discussed, and to just think that they were repressed. Oh, that must have just been like a repressed memory, but it could have been just a completely new kind of pseudo memory, right? Because the memory didn't actually, the event didn't actually happen, so it's not a real memory, right? So the facts of any situation might not be subjective, but the memory of them is both subjective, right? So it's your perspective and malleable, so it can be changed. So we have to be really, really careful about this. And I highly recommend that you pause now and go watch this video on Canvas, because it's really a useful exploration. Okay, so memory and the brain, like how does this work in our physical brain? So long-term potentiation. We have changes in our neurons, both in how they work and in how they are structured, when we are forming a new memory. So there's neurotransmitters um, released in greater amounts, and the number of synapses and synaptic connections made also increase, right? When we discussed neuroplasticity, this is basically neuroplasticity, right? Like this is exactly the same concept. We're just examining it from a different perspective. So, when you create new memories, new experiences, you're creating new synaptic connections. And this is how we create long-term memories. And if you block this process, right, so you can block it with medication, or you can become sick. So for example, many people who have heart attacks and live to talk about it later will say that they don't remember the day before, the day of, sometimes a little bit longer than that, because that process of long-term potentiation was blocked by the heart attack. Okay, so you won't form new memories like that. Those days are just gone. Again, the more times you recall a memory, the stronger those connections will become. So the more times you recall it, the easier it will be to pull out. That's why studying is important. So consolidation, right? So this is the process by which the short-term memories are transformed into long-term stable memories. They're not really subject to decay at this point. So this process helps ensure that, like, you can retrieve information later that you learned a long time ago. The benefits to this are obvious. Like if we learn how to hunt and fish when we're children, we still want to be able to retrieve that information when we're old, right? If we're relying on that to feed us. So there's two stages: synaptic and systems. So when, oh, I went back, sorry. Right. So the consolidation the synaptic consolidation, sorry, is when it's within a few hours after the learning. Okay. And this is where the changes at the synaptic level, it makes it more it makes it stronger with the neurotransmitters that help with memory. You're creating new neurons, all of that. The hippocampus plays a role in this kind of consolidation. So this is the first step. And then you move on to systems consolidation. So over a longer period of time, days, months, years, whatever it is, you're transferring the memories from the hippocampus to other areas of the brain. And, as they become more stable, more permanent, they're moving more to the neocortex, right? And more to the kind of white matter part of your brain, for lack of a better term. So like this is something that we can usually feel happening. And I was thinking about how to explain this to you. And I think that the best way to explain it is this is the part where of consolidating memory where we start to make meaning of experiences, right? So if we can't make meaning of something, we're probably not going to remember it very well. If we can't, you might have noticed that in this class, a lot of the assignments, almost all of the assignments, are related in some way to how you function in the world and how you are relating to the material personally. And I do that because of this, right? If I want the material to be consolidated in a way that where it's really going to stick, the best way to do that is to make it relevant to you so that the systems consolidation will occur, right? So that's why we do it that way. There are a number of factors that impact consolidation. This is mainly around synaptic consolidation, but it does have just in general kind of consolidation relevance. But sleep is so important. If we don't sleep, we do not consolidate memories. And it's really important as a student to understand this because you might think that the smartest thing to do is to pull an all-nighter to study for your test. It probably isn't. I mean, aside from this, where without sleep you're not consolidating memories, aside from that, there's a lot of other things that sleep does for you cognitively. Do not pull all-nighters. It's a really bad idea. You are almost always much better off with some good sleep and a little bit less studying than more cramming and less sleep. At the very least, you're probably not going to remember the information very well, at the very least. The rehearsal and practice, other word for this, studying, right? The repeated review of information makes those neural connections stronger, right? So you're gonna remember it longer, right? Like you studying something and practicing skills and that sort of thing makes it possible to pull these memories later because you're keeping them. Emotional experiences do tend to consolidate more quickly and more strongly. And so that's why the flashbulb memories are so vivid, because there's the events that are by definition very emotional. Okay. So a reconsolidation, you remember how I said every time, I've said it like 3 times now, every time you call up a memory, it can be changed before it's re-encoded. So the word for that is reconsolidation. So when you pull up a memory, you retrieve a memory, it temporarily enters a vulnerable state where it can be modified and dealt with and all of this stuff. And that's because when you pull up a memory, you're thinking about it actively or you're talking about it actively. It's really vulnerable, right? When it's in that active state. So, after that, it's put back into memory. And so, whatever changes that you have made, will stick. So memories by default change over time. Um, However, I mean, that sounds bad, right? But there's some, like, this is critically important, right? Like, we can't learn and change without this process occurring, right? Because we have to be integrating new information in order to function, right? And so it allows us to refine the information that we learned previously. This is how we build finer versions of skills, right? If you sew, you initially learned how to sew with a needle and a thread and, very carefully and slowly and all of that stuff. And, if you could not change those memories, that's procedural memory, right? If you could not change it, you would not be able to become more proficient. So it's really, really important. And therapeutically, we've learned to use this process of reconsolidation to address trauma, right? And there's the kind of traditional way to do this is just to, like, pull out the memories, discuss them, reframe them, and put them back in therapy. But now we have things, medications that we can use to help this process, that make the retrieval process or easier, that make the modification process or easier. It's a really exciting field, actually. So, like, the psychedelic assisted therapies are really, really, really um, important for treating things like PTSD. And this is basically what it's based on, is making reconsolidation easier. Okay. So if you have any questions or anything like that you want to know about, please do let me know. Office hours, email, Canvas are all great. And remember, this is kind of the first part of three, so stay tuned.